Rolling over the plains of eastern New Mexico, BNSF's Belen Cutoff is a busy section of the Southern Transcon. The double-track main line sees high volumes of intermodal traffic heading to and from Southern California. Every 24 hours, around 80 trains ride the high iron between Belen, located in the Rio Grande Valley, and Clovis, near the Texas border. Back in 2015, 7 Idea Productions set out to make a 2-part series on the BNSF across New Mexico and released a program on the Gallup subdivision from the Arizona border to Belen. However, we were unable to secure permission to access Abo Canyon, the centerpiece of the Clovis subdivision. So the second program never came to be. That is, until now. Fast forward 10 years, and drone technology has finally made visual access to the canyon possible. And you bet we'll spend some time here. We will also visit the impressive Belen Yard. Watch trains cross the Rio Grande. Climb to the highest point on the line at Mountainair. And the lowest point where trains cross the Pecos River at Fort Sumner. At Vaughn, BNSF crosses the former Southern Pacific line from Chicago to El Paso. And Uncle Pete will give us a nice show, with a surprise or two. This is heavy mainline railroading through the American Southwest. This is BNSF's New Mexico Mainline Part 2, the Belen Cutoff. The Clovis subdivision dates back to 1907, when the ATSF completed the Belen Cutoff from the Texas border at Texico through the eastern plains and into the Rio Grande Valley via Abo Canyon. Until this point, trains bound to and from Chicago ran north toward Trinidad, Colorado, and faced grades of 3% over Glorieta Pass and Raton Pass. If Santa Fe wanted to compete as a transcontinental railroad, they would need an easier route. And this was it. The maximum grade was reduced to 1.25% through Abo Pass. Today's journey along the Clovis sub begins at the busy Belen Yard, which is situated in a north-south direction. At El Paso Junction, the line turns to the east and crosses the Rio Grande River, then sprints through the desert, passing BNSF's new locomotive fueling facility at Becker. At East Says, the line enters Abo Canyon, where it crosses the Abo Arroyo 7 times on parallel bridges. This narrow crossing is wedged between the Manzano Mountains to the north and the Los Pinos Mountains to the south. East of the canyon, the grade continues past former towns of Sholey and Abo, and on to the summit just west of Mountainair. The line drops down to Willard and slowly climbs past the former town site of Lucy and over the Pedernel Hills to Encino. At Vaughn, the grade crosses over the Union Pacific's line between El Paso and Chicago, and we'll catch a few trains here. Wide open spaces would best describe the setting east of Vaughn as the railroad drops down toward the Pecos Valley. A pair of 1,500-foot bridges take trains over the Pecos River near Fort Sumner, as we follow the line east to its namesake destination of Clovis, New Mexico. This is the division point with the Hereford sub, which continues east toward Amarillo, Texas. We will end our journey at the Texas state line at Texico. As always, we have a lot to show you, so let's get started. The town of Belen, New Mexico dates back to 1740. It was founded as Our Lady of Bethlehem by a group of colonists who settled along the Rio Grande River, 35 miles south of Albuquerque. The name Belen is Spanish for Bethlehem. In 1907, when the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe completed its line west from the Texas border at Texico, Belen earned the nickname of Hub City. Rail lines headed south to El Paso, east to Amarillo, north to Trinidad, Colorado, and west through Arizona to California. This image is from 1943, and it shows a sprawling town as seen from the Santa Fe rail yard. Note the smoke in the distance of a westbound climbing out of the Rio Grande Valley toward Belize. The same photographer captured this image of Belen's railroad district not far from the depot and Harvey House. Many of the old buildings survive today, such as the 1907 Hotel Belen, with its old neon sign as it looked in the 1940s. Another piece of history sits near the yard, the ATSF M190 Doodlebug. This three-truck articulated engine was built in 1932 and used in commuter service between Albuquerque and Belen during the 1930s and 40s, and later between Clovis and Carlsbad in southeastern New Mexico. It has been on permanent display here since 2007. Belen may be small, but there is a real charm in the old railroad district. The historic landmark buildings that appear frozen in time. The neon lights that dazzle as they would have in the 20s and 30s, including those that sort of still shine on the old Santa Fe depot near the north end of the busy BNSF rail yard. A historic Harvey House stands near the yard. It dates back to 1910. During our visit, it was under renovation and off limits to the public. But back in 2015, while filming on the BNSF's Gallup Subdivision, we were able to get these nighttime scenes. A Harvey House was a railway station, restaurant, and hotel chain founded in 1876 by Fred Harvey. It catered to the growing number of train passengers. The first Harvey House was started in Florence, Kansas, and it grew into a chain of 45 restaurants and 20 dining cars, covering 12 states. The Belen Harvey House is now a museum and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It sits adjacent to the busy Belen Yard. A westbound stack train led by BNSF 6835 departs for Winslow, Arizona, after pausing for a crew change, 1,000-mile inspection, and to take on fuel. Belen is the southern end of New Mexico's Rail Runner light rail system, which began service to Santa Fe and the Albuquerque metro areas in the mid-2000s. A pair of Motive Power MP36 PH-3Cs power this train in push mode. Each engine utilizes an EMD 645 F3B diesel, generating 3,600 horsepower. As the train gets underway, there is no mistaking the sound of the turbocharged two-stroke diesels. Belen is one of the largest rail yards in the Southwest and one of the busiest on the BNSF. It serves as an important hub for fueling and inspections on the Southern Transcon between Chicago and Los Angeles. Locomotives take on an average of over 750,000 gallons of diesel fuel per day at this facility, and on busy days, it surpasses 1 million gallons. The yard includes 4 fuel pads for eastbound trains and 4 for westbounds. In 2024, BNSF announced the completion of a mainline improvement project which made Belen the largest fueling facility in North America. With an average of 80 trains per day, it accounts for nearly a quarter of BNSF's entire fuel usage. The new facility is located around 10 miles railroad east of Belen at Becker. It includes 2 new 20,000-foot processing tracks where trains can change crews, get inspected, and take on fuel. With the wide use of distributed power on today's trains, Belen utilizes a fleet of fuel trucks to service the remote-controlled power. This helps minimize each train's dwell time in the yard. Another westbound stack train led by BNSF 6245 approaches us as it prepares to stop for a crew change, inspection, and take on fuel. There are 8 fuel tracks in the yard. Numbers 1 through 4 are located on the north side and handle eastbound trains, while 5 through 8 are located here on the south side. This train is coming in on pad 7. Trains are also switched in the busy Belen yard, and we find the classic SD40-2, once a popular road engine, living out its final years as a yard goat. Several trains originate and terminate at this yard from places like Barstow, Clovis, Amarillo, Kansas City, Tulsa, Winslow, Phoenix, El Paso, Lubbock, Denver, and Blue Island, Illinois. The amount of freight that passes through here is staggering. A holdover from the steam era still finds use on today's modern railroad: the turntable. And when you think of a turntable in the rail yard, you probably picture something like this. But even in the 21st century, there is still a place for this relic. As trains are made up for various destinations throughout the BNSF system, power has to be added to those trains, and sometimes the engine that is to be the leader has to be turned around to face the proper direction. That just happens to be the case for this SD70 Ace number 8769. It is slated for a westbound train, but is currently pointed east. No problem. After going for a spin, it is soon on its way to its train. While flying over the yard, we spotted SD40-2 still in Santa Fe yellow bonnet colors. How we miss seeing these units on the main line and thinking, oh, just another 40-2. How times have changed. Speaking of time, it's time that we start heading toward Clovis, so let's get going. As trains depart Belen, the main line curves to the east and crosses the Rio Grande River on a pair of bridges. First up is BNSF 4224 with a ballast train on the number 1 track. Just a few minutes behind the ballast train, BNSF 6593 leads a high-priority intermodal eastbound on Main 2. Moving east of the Rio Grande, we find the BNSF 8323 leading a long train of international containers near Pedernel. The grade is around 0.6% as it leaves the river, and soon will increase to 1.25% as it climbs through Abo Canyon to the summit at Mountainair. Train robbers used to be something of the past that made for a good Western story. Today's container trains have become a target for criminals, and open doors with spilled contents have become all too common. The recent addition to the Belen fueling terminal is found here at Becker, in the desert 10 miles east of Belen Yard. An early morning stack train races toward Abo Canyon. As the Santa Fe proposed building a line west of Texas, they would have preferred a direct route to Albuquerque. Unfortunately, no such route could be found. The best option for getting the rails into the Rio Grande Valley was Abo Canyon. A wagon road had existed over Abo Pass since 1853. An eastbound stack train climbs through Abo Canyon on the old number 1 track. The second track was completed in 2011. Access to Abo Canyon is restricted, making it impossible to shoot from the ground, especially on the west end. Fortunately, there is open airspace to fly a drone, which is the only way we can bring these scenes to you. BNSF 8166 brings a stack train across the Abo Wash on the newer Main 2. The new bridge includes a 1,300-foot wind fence to protect trains from heavy gusts that plague this crossing of the Abo Wash. In 1902, the Santa Fe Railway formed a subsidiary known as the Eastern Railway Company of New Mexico. It was tasked with building 268 miles of the Belen Cutoff across the plains of New Mexico between the state line at Texico and Rio Puerco, 20 miles west of Belen. By February of 1903, A temporary line had been built to the mouth of Abo Canyon. Once the heavy work began, it was said that up to 75 horse-drawn wagons were constantly en route to supply what was needed for the effort. Leaving Abo Canyon behind, the train stretches out across the Rio Grande Valley toward Belen. BNSF began building a second main line through Abo Canyon in 2008. It required a great deal of blasting to make cuts for the new track. This aerial view shows what looks like a rock quarry near the east end of the canyon. It is actually a stockpile of overburden removed during construction. The rock is crushed and sold as aggregate. BNSF 8326 leads a high-priority intermodal train east out of the canyon on the original track, now referred to as Main 1. Flying into the canyon, we spot another slow-moving eastbound, climbing the 1.25% grade. The Abo Pass Trail played an important role in the 17th and 18th centuries for traders from the eastern plains to the main Spanish Trail between Mexico and Santa Fe. That trail was part of an extensive Spanish trade route between Mexico City and what is now New Mexico and Texas, known as the El Camino Real. Beans, cotton, buffalo meat, and salt were major commodities brought over the pass in trade with the Plains Indians. The importance of Abo Pass was highlighted during the American Civil War, when Abo militia were stationed here to guard the road from any hostile army from the Confederacy. Around 2 decades later, in the late 1800s, when the Santa Fe was looking for a viable route into the Rio Grande Valley with a manageable grade, this proved to be the best option. Fast forward another 150 years, and here we are with BNSF 7416 East coming through Abo Canyon on Main 1. As the train chases us through the canyon, we marvel at the amount of material that was removed during the building of the second main line. As the train exits the canyon, it passes under Highway 60, which follows the original trail through Abo Pass. As we watch the train slowly snaking through the canyon, we are reminded of a story about a band of outlaws back in 1909 called the Abo Pass Gang that would prey on slow-moving trains here. Led by Abo homesteader Frank Howe, the gang would climb aboard an eastbound, break into the cars, and throw off their merchandise. Others would load a wagon with the stolen goods and take it to their hideout. Their loot was mostly sacks of corn and dried fruit. They raided trains in Abo Canyon and murdered any who tried to stop them. Their deadly spree went on for about a year until the law began to close in. The gang fled for the Mexican border and were caught along the Rio Grande, 60 miles south of El Paso. You might say they died of lead poisoning after being surrounded by Texas Rangers. A westbound unit tank train heads down Main 2 in a meet. BNSF 3867 leads a manifest train upgrade at Sholey. This heavy train consists of 121 cars and is running with distributed power in a 3x1x1 configuration. German immigrant Fred Sholey built a ranch in this area in the 1880s. He stocked it with 15,000 sheep and 2,000 head of cattle, which he trailed from Belen. When railroad surveyors were plotting the Belen Cutoff, Sholey sold his land to the ATSF, and the ranch became a bustling railroad town, which lasted into the 1950s. A classic air motor windmill stands trackside just a couple miles east of the crossovers at Abo. The first air motor was sold in 1888, and their widespread use made them an iconic image of the American West. BNSF 7801 drifts down grade after cresting the summit at Mountainair. Mountainair was founded in 1902, ahead of the building of the Belen Cutoff. With the elevation of 6,500 feet above sea level, it enjoys the distinction of being the highest station on the Clovis Subdivision. One of its nicknames is Ozone City. The apex of the grade is actually west of here, near milepost 857. The classic Santa Fe Mountainair Depot dates back to 1908 and survives today as a base for maintenance of way crews. An eastbound train led by BNSF 6787 has just crested the summit and passes the depot on Main 1. The train meets the BNSF 8990 West. The train continues into a cut, reaching the top of a grade that began near Willard, around 7 miles to the east. From there, it is a 40-mile downhill run to Belen. On the BNSF timetable, Mountainair is located near milepost 854. BNSF 3781 has just passed the signals at White as it leads a westbound manifest up grade on the number 2 track. Mountainair was once a major production and shipping point for pinto beans. During its height between 1915 and 1921, an estimated 30 million pounds of pinto beans were shipped from elevators at Mountainair each year. The Great Depression, coupled with decades of drought, spelled the end for the pinto bean industry. A lone GE number 6191 provides additional tractive effort to the rear of the train. The ES44AC was built in February of 2007. Another classic windmill is found pumping water on a nearby cattle ranch. We are just west of the small village of Willard. Eastbounds continue downgrade from Mountainair and round the Willard curve. Red rock and juniper-covered hills have given way to a more arid desert scene as the railroad continues east toward the old division point of Vaughn. The maximum track speed is 70 miles per hour, depending on the makeup of the train. BNSF 6690 races past milepost 838 on the north track. The train met the BNSF 4747 West near Salillo. East of Willard, the railroad passes through a basin filled with numerous salt ponds referred to as Laguna del Perro. meaning Dog Lake in Spanish. These are the remnants of Lake Estancia, which dried up thousands of years ago. Indians and Spanish settlers used to mine salt here. On the railroad timetable, this is Salillo, near milepost 834. BNSF 6134 is eastbound on Main 1. A CSX unit has found its way onto this train. As the train heads off to the east along Highway 60, it begins a gentle climb out of the Salt Lakes through the stations of Lucy, Culebra, Dunmore, and Pedernel before dropping down to the village of Encino. A westbound grain train is tied down just west of the Lucy Trail Road crossing. The Salt Basin has transitioned into rangeland where cattle ranches are found along the track. They once relied on the rail to get beef to market, but that was long ago. BNSF 4981 West passes the crossovers near the former town site of Lucy. The town once had a depot, 2 general stores, a hotel, and a school, but drought and depression took their toll. Today, Lucy is just a control point on the Clovis Subdivision timetable at milepost 828. This train is made up of the old rib-sided grain hoppers, including quite a few in Burlington Northern paint. A BNSF engineer told us once that when you encounter a headwind with a train of these ribbed hoppers, the extra drag would slow the train down significantly. As we follow the Clovis Sub along New Mexico Highway 60, we pass several old ghost towns and many more that are slowly dying. One such ghost town is found here on the windswept plains not far from the BNSF station of Pedernel. The sign on the metal building says Vaughn, which is still several miles to the east. It gives us a hint of the economy, namely the pinto bean trade which once thrived here. Another remnant of the pinto bean trade is the ghost town of Pedernel. This was a bustling community in the early 20th century. It was established in 1902. By 1917, the growing town had a post office and a 4-room schoolhouse by 1935. During the town's heyday in the 20s and 30s, Thousands of sacks of pinto beans were shipped annually by rail. As local agriculture began to decline, so did the town. Its post office closed, and Pedernel was abandoned in 1955. Today, the town's population is mostly tumbleweeds. There is some new activity hereabouts: a gigantic wind farm. Pedernel has become a staging area for a growing forest of wind turbines, the largest in New Mexico. Components of these huge structures are brought here by truck and rail, then transported to their designated sites for assembly. BNSF 5053 takes a heavy stack train eastbound through the old ghost town. It has 7 engines in a 3x2x2 configuration. BNSF 4712 is a nice catch. The C-44-9W was delivered to BNSF in November of 1997, wearing the Santa Fe War Bonnet paint scheme, but with BNSF lettering. Some have referred to these units as fake bonnets, as they never wore the Santa Fe name. A pair of Norfolk Southern diesels lead a westbound into Pedernel, where it will stop for a crew change. High wind restrictions have been in effect today, with winds reported over 60 miles per hour between here and Clovis. Trains traveling in the restriction were limited to 20 miles per hour. Thus, crews would not be able to make Belen in their normal hours of service. With a fresh crew on board, NS 8151 continues its westbound journey along the Clovis Subdivision. SD-70 Ace number 1137 clears its throat as the train gets underway. The next town east of Willard is Encino, meaning oak in Spanish. The town was a watering hole and a resting place for anyone traveling the eastern plains of New Mexico. The railroad built a depot here, and a loading chute was set up along the tracks so local ranchers could get their livestock to market. A noted resident of Encino was R.C. Dillon. He served as governor of New Mexico in the 1920s. This was his house. It stands vacant right next to Highway 60. Closer to the main line, we find what is left of another house. We never caught the name of the woman who once called this place home, but we talked with her nephew, who recalled to us the town's better days long ago. BNSF 6624 heads through the scene as it takes a run at the Pedernel Hills to the west. The train will be stopping at Culebra to meet a dog catch crew after being delayed by heavy winds out of Clovis. During construction of the Belen Cutoff, the Santa Fe had to cross over the El Paso and Southwestern's line at Llano Junction. They did this with a large fill in a tunnel which still exists on the old number 1 track. In 1902, Llano Junction became Vaughn. The EP&SW became part of the Southern Pacific in 1924, and today you might get lucky and catch a Union Pacific train rolling between El Paso and Chicago. Such is the case with UP 8846 North. This train most likely departed UP's Santa Teresa Intermodal Facility just west of El Paso. It has 5 units on the point, although only 3 of the 5 appear to be online. There are also 2 more remote-controlled DPUs mid-train. The train has a high green as it ducks under the BNSF mains. We were hoping for an over-under shot, but unfortunately the next BNSF train was about 5 minutes too late. BNSF 7540 is westbound on the newer number 2 track, which was completed in 2017. While the train crosses over the UP, we notice that the signal has set back up for a yellow, and there is a headlight visible through the tunnel. It looks like there's going to be a meet. Vaughn marks the division point between UP's Carrizozo subdivision from El Paso and the Tucumcari sub, which continues to Dalhart, Texas. Our second train is UP 8625, with more containers heading north. The train slows to a stop for a crew change, greatly increasing our chances for an over-under. Then it happens. BNSF 7173 West heads our way. It would have been nicer to see it on the closer track too, but we won't complain too much about that. We have heard of people waiting all day here for an event like this and being skunked. The fact that we were able to shoot these scenes all within the space of about an hour is truly remarkable. While the northbound UP changes crews, we take the drone up to peer over the tracks and see what's waiting in the siding. Looks like a grain train, and what do you know? UP 1989, the heritage unit honoring the Denver and Rio Grande Western, is the leader. That'll work. With a fresh crew on board for the Tucumcari sub, the stack train is again underway. We mentioned before the increasing number of break-ins on stack trains in recent years, and this is one of the worst cases we've seen so far. Around a dozen containers on the rear of this train have open doors, some with their contents spilled out. The open doors on these tampered cars present an additional safety hazard. As the open containers pass through the narrow portal of the tunnel, we notice the doors facing outwards often made contact with the tunnel lining, causing them to violently slam into the container. You can clearly see it here. In 1943, a photographer took this shot of the flyover at Vaughn from the caboose of a westbound Santa Fe. Note the water tank and small coaling tower on the SP. Southern Pacific did run coal-burning engines between Tucumcari and El Paso after it purchased the line from the EP&SW. Here is the same view 82 years later as the 1989 departs Vaughn. As the rear of the grain train passes under the BNSF, we see what looks to be a westbound on Main 1. This is actually a crew switching auto racks at Vaughn. Although it is not evident from this angle, there is a connector track between the two railroads just east of here. Another high-priority westbound crosses over the UP on Main 2. While shooting the train, our camera operator noticed an orange stick near his feet that wasn't there earlier, except it's not a stick, it's a 4-foot-long whip snake, also known as a red racer. They are non-venomous, but a little startling when they suddenly appear near your pant leg. This guy is busy hunting lizards or rodents, and we'll let him carry on. As this sign suggests, Vaughn's existence is tied to the two major railroads of the West. There is even a 24-hour Penny's Diner located nearby, which caters to railroad crews. It's a good thing because there really isn't much out here at all. This Santa Fe depot remains. Similar to Mountainair, it serves as a maintenance of way base. BNSF 7472 is eastbound for Clovis. On July 30th, 1928, aviation pioneer Charles Lindbergh made an emergency landing in Vaughn after his engine failed. It was said that a local mechanic got him up and flying again. This was after Lindbergh's famous transatlantic flight. From Vaughn east to the Pecos River Valley, the country looks like this. The vast emptiness is interrupted occasionally by a ranch house or a ghost town. BNSF 8220 is eastbound at control point CP 7581. The next morning, Dash 944 CW number 4187 leads a westbound stack train through the same rural crossing in a meet with an eastbound. BNSF 5151 leads an eastbound stack train of similar makeup down the 0.6% downhill grade on the number 1 track. This is Yeso, New Mexico, a ghost town located right along Highway 60. Like Vaughn, it sprouted to life during the building of the Belen Cutoff. It was a water stop for thirsty steam locomotives climbing out of the Pecos River Valley at Fort Sumner. This post office began operation in 1909. During its heyday in the 1940s, Yeso's population swelled to over 300 families. The name Yeso is Spanish for gypsum, or chalk, and the underground water has a high gypsum content, making it undrinkable for anything but livestock and steam locomotives. After World War II, the steam engine gave way to diesels, which did not need to stop here for water, and the town declined. Most residents moved away to nearby Fort Sumner or other bigger towns, and in 1966, Yeso was abandoned. Its bones left to bleach in the New Mexico sun. There is still a post office here, and a few households hanging on. BNSF 7500 leads an intermodal train eastbound. East of Yeso, the Clovis subdivision drops down to a crossing of the Pecos River at Fort Sumner. Originating in north-central New Mexico, the Pecos River runs for 926 miles before emptying into the Rio Grande near Del Rio, Texas. In the latter half of the 19th century, anything west of the Pecos was considered to be the Wild West. Where Mountainair is the highest point on the Clovis sub at around 6,500 feet, this is the lowest point at around 4,000 feet above sea level. In 2016, BNSF added a second main line over the Pecos River as part of their effort to double-track the entire southern Transcon. It was part of a 2.3-mile segment of the double track added at Fort Sumner. The 20-span bridge is 1,546 feet long and now officially carries Main 1 over the river. We picked a beautiful spring morning to set up along the Pecos River to watch trains running in and out of Fort Sumner. First up is BNSF 8069 East, with the train made up mostly of Amazon and JB Hunt containers. It's on the newer number 1 track. Here is a scene that wasn't possible before 2016 when the second bridge was completed. October 31st, 1862, Congress authorized the construction of Fort Sumner to protect settlers in the Pecos River Valley. The fort was abandoned in 1869 and purchased by a rancher named Lucien Maxwell. His daughter Paulita was a friend of the famous outlaw Billy the Kid. On July 14, 1881, Billy the Kid was shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett in Maxwell's house. To this day, you can visit the Billy the Kid Museum and his grave at the old fort south of the present-day town. Riding off into the sunset, or in this case away from it, an eastbound stag train passes the classic Santa Fe depot, a fitting end to our day in Fort Sumner. As the Santa Fe built across the plains of eastern New Mexico, the railroad ran a campaign to settle the area. Over 1,600 trainloads of immigrants came in 1908, each with 2 or 3 families on board. People came from Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. One of the advertised town sites was Taiban. Like many of the towns we have seen, Taiban saw a 30-year boom before going bust. There just wasn't enough here to make the town last. Here stands the Presbyterian Church. Like the rest of the town, it has a build date of 1908. BNSF 6834 is eastbound at Taiban. Continuing east, we come to another ghost town known as Tolar. Its story is quite different than the other towns we have seen. Tolar was leveled by bombs during World War II. You could say it was friendly fire. On November 30th, 1944, at about noon, a westbound 81-car train derailed here. It was carrying airplane engines, canned corned beef, mattresses, fuel oil, and 165 500-pound bombs destined for the Pacific Theater. As the train caught fire, the bombs exploded. The blasts were felt 120 miles away in Hereford, Texas. It left a crater 75 feet wide and vaporized 500 feet of track. Most of the buildings in Tolar were destroyed, including the railroad depot, post office, and school. Amazingly, there was only one fatality: President Jess Brown. Today, a historic marker stands on nearby Highway 60. This bent piece of a side frame was recovered from the explosion that leveled the town on that November day, a reminder of when World War II came to the plains of eastern New Mexico. BNSF 7526 takes a westbound rack train through the former town site. A high wind warning is in effect between Fort Sumner and Amarillo, Texas, with winds topping out at 80 miles per hour. Eastbound trains were being held until the strongest winds subsided. BNSF 3869 rolls slowly west between Melrose and Cantera, and hopefully away from the worst of the storm. A mural welcomes us to the town of Melrose, near milepost 628. The grain elevators signal the importance of agriculture in the area. Originally, Melrose was to be a division point on the Belen Cutoff, complete with a rail yard, roundhouse, and machine shops. However, the railroad changed its mind and moved everything except the depot to Clovis. Sadly, the Melrose depot was demolished in 2020. Set up not far from the depot site are a set of sophisticated trackside detectors for both mains. We detect a westbound on Main 1, BNSF 6251. Arriving at Clovis, we are greeted by the ATSF 9005. This 1906 Baldwin switcher spent its entire life switching cars here in Clovis Yard until it was retired and donated to the city in 1954. The locomotive sits near a building that is said to be the oldest structure that is still standing in Clovis, the 1907 train depot. It originally served long-distance trains running between Chicago and California, such as the California Limited, Grand Canyon Limited, San Francisco Chief, and the Scout. Today, it is preserved and utilized as a restaurant with fine dining that is just a stone's throw away from the busy Clovis Yard. A Santa Fe neon sign stands near the BNSF Yard Office building, which from the ground is really about all you can see. Santa Fe Railway engineers were instructed to locate and buy the first level section of land west of the border at Texico. You're looking at it. First known as Riley's Switch. The story goes that the daughter of a railroad official proposed the name of Clovis after studying about the first Christian king of Franks in the early 6th century AD. Besides being a rail yard, this is a division point between the Clovis Sub, part of the Southwest Division, and the Hereford Sub, which is part of the Kansas Division and continues east to Amarillo, Texas. Just west of the yard is the junction with the 183-mile Carlsbad Sub, which runs south. A westbound intermodal train slows as it enters the yard. It'll be stopping for a crew change before continuing its journey. Although this is the eastern end of the Clovis subdivision, we wanted to continue to the Texas border, since it is only 9 miles from East Clovis. Setting up right on the state line, the sign welcomes westbound travelers into the state of New Mexico. More grain elevators signify the importance of agriculture in the area. Just east of Texico is Lone Star Junction, where the Slayton sub splits off from the Hereford sub to the southeast through Lubbock and down to Sweetwater, Texas. A westbound Bear Table train is coming off the Slayton sub as it slowly makes its way toward Clovis. Within a few minutes, we hear our final train approaching. BNSF 8769 is in charge of an auto-rack train that has just begun its 100-mile journey across the Hereford subdivision toward Amarillo. As the train crosses into the Lone Star State, it's time to say goodbye for now. We hope you've enjoyed your tour of this amazing piece of the BNSF Southern Transcon through New Mexico. And if you want to see more, be sure to check out our program BNSF's New Mexico Mainline, the Gallup Sub. It covers the western half of the state from the Arizona border. As always, until next time, thanks for watching.